Yeah, he went into detail about why he went to Coutts, and essentially he was there to tell the government that they'd gone too far and that people had had enough. That was his whole point.
Chris Carbert described police officers as heroes of our Western culture during his testimony in Friday's proceedings in his own trial alongside his co-accused Anthony Olenek here in Lethbridge, Alberta. Robert Krychik reporting for Rebel News. Chris Carbert and Anthony Olenek are both charged with conspiracy to murder. If convicted, they face potentially life sentences. The Crown has accused the two men of conspiring to murder police officers during their time at the 2022 Coutts protest and blockade. They're both also charged with unlawful possession of a firearm for a dangerous purpose, mischief over $5,000. Anthony Olenek is additionally charged with unlawful possession of an explosive device, dangerous to the public peace. The two men have pled not guilty to all charges against them. The 2022 Coutts protest and blockade, much like the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa around the same time, was a civilly disobedient and peaceful demonstration against this broad apparatus of surveillance and control and censorship, all of these orders and edicts and mandates issued by all levels of government and marketed to the rest of us as public health measures to reduce COVID-19 transmission. Rebel News has been reporting on these events since their inception, since their genesis at the 2022 Coutts protest and blockade, where we had reporters embedded at the location among the protesters. Fast forward to now, 2024, July, me being here in Lethbridge, reporting on this trial every single day. Chris Carbert, alongside his co-accused, is being charged with conspiracy to murder. Remember, the Crown is accusing the two men of conspiring to murder police officers during their time at the 2022 Coutts protest and blockade. Yet Chris Carbert said in his testimony that police officers are heroes of our Western culture. He also further stated repeatedly that he never had any fear for his safety, that he was not concerned about being attacked by police officers during his time at the protest. He also said that his interactions with police officers at the Coutts protest and blockade was congenial, that they were very nice in their interactions with him. Catherine Bayak, Chris Carbert's lawyer, asked him during her examination of her client, quote, "Were you part of a group trying to make Coutts a ground zero for a conflict with the police?" Chris Carbert replied, "Absolutely not." So I'm here with Stevlin. Stevlin is an interested party, a concerned citizen who has been attending many of the proceedings in this trial, and I'd like him to share some of his insights with you folks regarding what we've heard from Chris Carbert in his testimony over the past couple of days. So, Stevlin, if you don't mind, let's start with some of the firearms testimony. What did Chris Carbert say about a dozen-something photographs that were shown to jurors from the prosecution of a certain firearm?
Well, actually, his lawyer, Catherine Bayak, was setting that up much earlier when the Crown's witness, who was a firearms expert, was on the stand. And she showed the expert a series of photographs, I believe about 14 in total. And she said, she started with one, and she said, then she went to another one, and she said, now, is it possible that these two guns are actually the same gun? And he said, well, they look different, but it's possible. And then she showed a third and a fourth and on and on and on. And so he acknowledged that it is possible that all of those guns were actually just the same gun with different appearances. And then when Carbert was on the stand, I believe on Thursday, they sort of went through a similar exercise, but he actually explained, he said, okay, this is the original gun. The photo, I believe, was taken from his phone, from his own personal photograph collection. But she showed a photo. He said, this is the gun as I bought it. This is the gun after I bought a package to change the appearance of the gun. And he even made a self-deprecating joke where he said, but I'm kind of a fool with money and I do everything backwards. So first I buy something, then I figure out the right measurements, and I figure out that I don't actually like this package or whatever it's called. So at that point, he kept purchasing different things to modify the appearance. And at some point, he painted the gun and on and on and on. So in essence, all of those photos, if nobody had clarified, the jury might have been led to believe that there were 14 guns when really they're all just the same gun.
Bayak also asked Carbert, quote, "Did you have any concerns for your personal safety while at Coutts?" His reply, no. Carbert also described the Coutts' protest and blockade as a means to avoid violence between the government and the citizens. He said that he hoped the demonstration would be a way to abolish what he viewed as this trajectory, this momentum that was leading to what he saw as an inevitable clash between Canada's government and its citizens. He said that the so-called vaccine mandates imposed on truckers seeking to cross the U.S.-Canada border would continue expanding to other professions and lines of work and categories of persons if they were not stopped. In other words, the Canadian government would start mandating these so-called vaccines onto people of all kinds of different work, all kinds of different categories, and in so doing would eventually incite violence from the citizens who sought to resist this growing governmental abuse. Chris Carbert also testified about the location of 2 firearms that were shown to jurors via the prosecution as evidence of these alleged crimes. And Stevlin, what do you think was noteworthy about the testimony in terms of where those guns were?
Well, so the guns were actually, again, there were photographs taken from his phone, and the actual guns themselves during the Coutts protest were at Chris's home, I believe in the Lethbridge area, right, and they were in a safe. So that actually reminded me of the so-called pipe bombs that Tony Olenek was charged with, that were located in his home, in Claire's home, 200 kilometers north of Coutts, in the back, I understand, in the back of a sea can, of a storage container, and they were left over from an old mining operation, but now he's charged with explosives related to the event. Yeah, he went into detail about why he went to Coutts, and essentially he was there to tell the government that they'd gone too far and that people had had enough. That was his whole point. Yeah, he mentioned that he sees police as heroes, and his problem was with the government, which I actually took to mean he had a problem with parliamentarians.
Right. Here's a quote from Chris Carbert from his testimony. "If we don't stop these mandates, it's going to progress. And what he's referring to is the progression, the expansion of these so-called vaccine mandates upon all different types of Canadians. Okay, anything else about Carbert's testimony that caught your eye that you think the audience should know about who's observing this?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most interesting aspects of his testimony was just describing his thoughts and feelings prior to Coutts, and he started prepping because he was concerned with just the state of the world. He felt that the vaccine mandates were going to get harsher and harsher. Right. There was a video that they played of, it may or may not have been true, but it was of somebody in Australia describing how the military were training to enter people's homes to forcefully vaccinate them. So this is the kind of thing that was weighing on his mind, and he was planning on the possibility of having to take his son and run to the hills at some point. And so one of the things that weighed heavily on him was he received a letter apparently from the government because he owned a landscaping company. Yeah. And the letter offered him $1,500 per employee to enforce vaccine mandates within his own company. And that was the kind of thing that made him really uneasy, because he was determined not to get vaccinated himself and not to vaccinate his son.
"I camp every single weekend in the summer, literally every single weekend." That's a quote from Chris Carbert's testimony. On Friday, he continued emphasizing his outdoorsman hobbyism, also his interest in firearms, as he was sort of a gun guy, for lack of a better term, and was interested in hunting. The elicitation of this testimony from his lawyer, Catherine Bayak, perhaps links to the rationale, the context behind his ownership of firearms that the prosecution seeks to characterize and frame as tools towards this conspiracy to murder that they're alleging Chris Carbert took part in alongside Anthony Olenek. Okay, Stevlin, what else should the audience know about the testimony that you observed that you thought newsworthy?
Well, another thing that was interesting was Chris described what he did when he found out that Tony Olenek and Chris Lysak had both been arrested, both of those gentlemen being his trailer mates. Upon learning of their arrest, he went and watched a video of Chris Lysak's arrest, and then he went to bed. And when the police approached the trailer, he was asleep, and the rest is history. But I think it really shows that there was no plan. There was never a plan to engage the police violently.
This trial initially had court dates scheduled until the 19th of July, which is this Friday. The trial, of course, has not yet concluded. It may conclude, based on people who I speak to who have reasonable estimates, by early August, let's say. Here's what's outstanding. Examination of Chris Carbert by Marilyn Burns, who is counsel for Anthony Olenek, still must be concluded. Then we will have cross-examination of Chris Carbert by the prosecution. Then there may be re-examination of Chris Carbert by his lawyer, Catherine Bayak, and again, possibly Marilyn Burns. After that, we'll have closing statements from the prosecution and the two defense attorneys. After that, there will be deliberations between the two parties, the defense teams and the prosecution, as far as how to compose what's called a charge for the jury, which is a term to describe instructions the judge, in this case, Justice David Lebrans, will provide to the jurors before they retire to deliberate their verdicts. So maybe early August. Unlike our so-called mainstream media competitors, we're not getting government handouts to toe the machine's line. And of course, we have operational costs. I don't work for free. We depend on our generous and beautiful audience to keep this journalistic enterprise going through donations and contributions. So please help us out and visit truckertrial.com and stay up to date with our ongoing coverage.